and welcome back to Property Matters on Dublin South FM with myself, Carol Tallon. You can contact us on Twitter at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. I'm now joined by Vince Harney, Chartered Surveyor, Chartered Accountant and Chartered Tax Advisor. So Vince is CEO of Anisorian and has more than 25 years experience in senior finance director roles with development companies worldwide. So Vince, you're very welcome back to the show. We've relied on your expertise before, so we're delighted to have you back.
Thank you, Carol. Delighted to be back.
Vince, we spoke to you at the start of the year. An awful lot has changed since the start of the year. Just before the summer break, there was a run of housing legislation, culminating in the Housing for All strategy that was announced earlier this month. So I definitely want to speak to you about many aspects of that. But tomorrow, Wednesday, you're running a seminar for the Chartered Surveyor Society of Ireland, the SCSI, about build to rent. You might just give us an overview of what that seminar is going to take in.
Yes, that's right. Well, basically, it's capturing everything for people, from people who don't know what BTR is about, what it even means, because everybody keeps using BTR, which means build to rent. But really to talk about the sector and how it's gaining momentum, popularity, and becoming a mainstream asset class, I would say. So these are the key points we're focusing on. And a couple of things talking about what schemes are happening now, who's doing the deals, what type of deals they are. And also importantly, Carol, as you suggested before with all the legislation, how this fits into the context of the Housing for All announcement that's just been made in the last couple of weeks.
Okay, and that's something actually I wanted to address with you today, but let's roll back a little bit. Build to rent, you're absolutely right. The acronym is being used almost interchangeably with the private rented sector, and they're very different. So, you know, there's definitely an issue with language, but there's also an issue with unhelpful monikers or terms of terms being used in the media that are not helpful as well. And that's caused such confusion, and not just across consumers, across the industry as well, I've noticed.
I think that's right. I mean, I think it's been highlighted recently. I mean, you've probably read the articles in the Independent and the Times where you see Sinn Féin object to a BTR scheme on principle rather than understanding what it's about, what it's delivering, what it's meant to be doing. Which clouds the issue because it doesn't understand what the purpose, etc. And like you said, the acronym sometimes isn't helpful. They equate BTR equals vulture fund equals somebody screwing somebody else, and that's not the case.
Yeah. But, on the other side of it, objections are certainly not restricted to any one political party. What we see is that this is absolutely a cross-party issue, and it's a cross-societal issue. So actually, that's right. Yeah. So in terms of build to rent, it's well established outside of Ireland, but it's it is a fairly new asset class in Ireland.
It's a new asset class in Ireland, as it was in the UK a few years ago, because it emanated from the USA, where it's known as multifamily, and is in the USA. It's popular because it gives people the ability to move from town to town fairly quickly, going wherever the work is, giving them the lifestyle that they want as well. And in the UK, the take-up was probably negligible at 2010, but now it's fast becoming the mainstream asset class. Every town centre has probably been rejuvenated by it. And I think the impact has happened in Dublin since about 2017, 2018. A lot of transactions, 2019, 2020, coming out of the COVID pandemic. And now you've just got to look around. Predominantly, I admit, Dublin-based, but equally, the major cities in Ireland can benefit from the rejuvenation of their city centres into urban lifestyle living.
That's a really interesting one, because actually to see the experience of this rollout in the UK, we can't even we've nothing to compare that to in Ireland, because built to rent. We're barely looking at the early schemes in Cork. To my knowledge, I don't know if there are any in Galway or Limerick due to viability issues. So at the moment, really, all we have to base this on is Dublin. But do you see in the long term, as this asset class grows, that we're likely to see this in market towns up and down the country?
Very possibly. Very possibly. I mean, you've got the usual problems you have with people living away from town centres. It's all about delivering lifestyle as well, Carol, where you've got a focal point that brings people together, and having people live in sort of in that close environment is beneficial. You've got the schools, the restaurants, the areas, that whole lifestyle, and importantly, sense of community, and rejuvenating the city centres of some of the towns is ideal for that. And there's a lot of stuff. You've only got to go to some of the city centres to see there's some existing spaces that would lend itself ideally to those multi-family stroke BTR assets.
Yeah, it's interesting actually that's something that gets lost in the conversation around rent to build in Ireland, whereas actually if you look at build to rent, if you look at that, the amenity is one of the differentiating factors. You touched on it there, not just about the quality of the offering, which rental in Ireland has not always been known for. It is that fostering a sense of community. So Correct. In terms of build to rent, if we look at the amenity, what are the real differentiators here between maybe what Irish renters would have been used to in the Irish market?
I would say the differentiators are the first one is you're creating a community, right? So the first point is that they're not soulless concrete blocks in the middle of nowhere that people don't speak to each other. Often they will have a lot of green areas, green space. I mean, it's quite interesting, even some of the ones in London, they've created the green space on top of the roofs or in certain areas, so slightly different. But they will have things like on-site amenities such as restaurants, retail, places for people to meet and socialise, which is quite an important facet. And also they'll be close to local transport hubs and maybe even close to places of work. So people can get that separation but be in a close proximity to where they need to be.
Yeah, one of the main criticisms, particularly in Ireland, has been around the levels of rent charge. So as in this is quite a premium offering. Is there... You're more familiar with, say, the service across the UK. Across the UK, now that build to rent is more established, are we seeing, is there a scale, a sliding scale where you've got premium providers, but you've more affordable options as well, or is it all premium?
I think that's actually, strange enough, probably in the UK, it's more location dependent. So you'll pay real premium dollar for schemes in London, as opposed to, say, Manchester. Well, there's still a premium to be paid because what you're paying for is a lifestyle, I think. So there's, that it's like buying properties as well. You can buy a normal house for X, but a premium house will cost you more. So there is that level to it. However, there is an equilibrium in the market where the rents are fairly... I wouldn't say static, but at least come down to an equalised level now. So they're not sky high by any means. I think one of the benchmarks as well, also, Carol, which is quite interesting, is that this is internationally, they will always be higher than anybody's mortgage. Okay, just have to make that quite clear, because there is an inference from certain people that, buying a house is always cheaper, and undoubtedly is if you've got the capital to put down in the first place. So,
is this a difference between the Irish renting mentality and maybe other jurisdictions? Because we haven't had a very diverse rental market in Ireland, and in fact, only in recent days I was speaking to the developer of a new scheme, and they described what they're looking to deliver as more of, as they refer to it, a European model, whereby actually They're looking at longer term leases,
Yeah.
so not 2 years. They're looking at 5 years, but they're also looking at the people who are acquiring or going into to take up these leases. They actually will be responsible for fully furnishing them. They may even have input into some of the finishes, which is very unusual. I've never heard of that in a rental situation in Ireland. Also, I mean, are Irish tenants ready to invest in fully furnishing a brand new home, invest in putting in the white goods and things like that on a rental property? We've no experience of that in Ireland.
That's true. It's new. And actually that does emanate, that is very much a European attitude. You look in, it's quite interesting, I haven't got it with me, but there's a statistic that shows, say, Germany is, I would say, that one of the highest rental areas ever, but they all sign up for incredibly long leases. I mean, I know in Dresden, for example, a lot of people will invest in a 20-year lease, right? Which is phenomenal, instead of buying it, because they like the fact that the stuff's provided for them, the services are there for them, and they don't mind paying for those services rather than having the ownership. But that medium you're talking about, maybe of the 5 year with the white goods and thing, it's a mindset issue. I think that a lot of the young people nowadays buy into that. It's not the same as maybe people of my generation, where it's very much ownership led rather than anything else. And you've got to own assets, and this, that, and the other. I think people are a little bit more circumspect nowadays.
The only thing is, I remember, maybe a decade ago when we looked into different home ownership levels, and Germany was one country that came up as being very low home ownership rates. However, they would have had people getting involved in more diverse investments at a much earlier stage. So you have people in their 20s investing in stocks and shares and other asset classes. So they were never dependent. In Ireland, we've had this mentality that you pay into your mortgage and that essentially is your retirement. And that's something where we can see that there's definitely going to be an issue with long-term rental, because these changes have happened before the people were prepared for them. So they're not financially prepared. So people who are still renting in their 40s and 50s are not financially prepared what's going to happen when they stop generating an income.
That's right, Carol. I think you've hit the nail on the head there. But I think that's a transitionary type arrangement, because certainly the demographics, if you look how people have shifted, I mean, home ownership, I would say, was probably fairly common in the 20s, and say 10, 15 years ago. Now that's been pushed out to 35 because people cannot afford the capital input. So there's that side as well, and I echo what you're saying. But you've still got this attitude that the investment in real estate is more important than the investment in equities, stocks, and any diversified portfolio, because people predominantly regard those as being quite risky. Equities are quite high risk. They can be brilliant one minute and bomb the next. So there's a stability to owning your own home. And people actually, I would say, are looking to have second homes, or that's the sort of real estate investments they're looking at.
Well, notwithstanding that we're at an early stage of build to rent in Ireland, what role do you see this particular sector playing in the overall housing market going forward?
I think it's an intrinsic and massively important aspect. I was just looking at that Housing for All brochure this morning, actually, and the commitment to get to 300 houses by 2030, which I think is quite a tall commitment, by the way. 170,000 of those are private-led units. And I think at least 50% of those will be built to rent provided, which probably just goes to show you just how much is required of the built to rent sector.
Okay,
And
that's an interesting one, because I was just looking, and the most up-to-date figures I could see for the UK was that build to rent, is it hovering somewhere between 8 and 12% of the overall housing delivery?
Yeah, it is. And I was looking at statistics there. God, this is sad, isn't it? I was looking at statistics. There is around the 200,000 units mark that they've done to date. So that's quite impressive statistic if you see where it's come from, and that's in a relatively short period of time.
Okay. Vince, you mentioned the housing for all, and you're absolutely right. I think it's the figure 312,000 by 2030. I haven't spoken to anybody, public or private sector, who has any concept of how delivery is going to be ramped up like that. Obviously, it's one of those things that we hope they're right, but it's very difficult to see a pathway to achieving that, particularly at the moment. But housing for all, there's a lot in that. I think 213 action points, and I always believe if you're really serious about something, I think I would have had more confidence in it if they came forward with 3 actions. That could really,
I think
230, that scares me.
There's a lot of you're absolutely right. There's a massive pressure to deliver on everything, and when you're spreading the amount like that, it's something is bound to fail, because there's a lot of things that need to happen in the first place before that can even be tackled properly. So, I mean, one of the big things is the private and public partnerships need to be firmly established so that things can just be moved on at a fast pace. And one of my worries as well is, Carol, is about delivery. We're now in September 21, and we're talking about doing 300 by December 30. I think we've lost another year in a way, because things are not going to move out particularly fast. So we're talking over 9 years. So
particularly when we see that planning, and they're down, and planning commencements are down.
Yeah, and this is it as well. One of the things that it was talking about was overall how do we say it? Changing the attitude to planning and moving that forward. That is going to take some time, Carol. It's not a quick fix tomorrow morning job, and it means that the planning process is going to have to adhere to, I would think, for the next 2 to 3 years before we get to any smooth, established process to speed things up. So
planning is such it almost seems like the beast that nobody can manage. Everybody knows it needs to be tackled, and to be fair, during COVID some advancements have been made kind of towards digitizing, which has been on the agenda for quite some time. But we're referring to housing for all, but actually before that, and before the summer recess, there were, I think, 7 bills pushed forward in the last couple of weeks of the Dáil sitting, and about 5 of those related to construction, property, housing, thereabouts, including, the phasing out of the strategic developments. How do you think that's going to impact on build to rent? Is it going to be positive or negative?
Personally, I think it's going to have to be positive. It initially you would think it would be negative because they're getting rid of a very structured type of zoning, but equally we've got to move forward with the new type of zonings that they're producing, and they've got to promote what they want to promote, which is housing. So I think it could be neutral in some ways. That the process just needs to be shifted on. I think it is difficult, Carol, to comment with any great detail until we start some of the tangibility of what they're suggesting.
Yeah. One of the big things around the strategic housing developments, when we speak to developers who are actually trying to push these through, is that, in theory, if the timelines were honoured, then that would be one thing. But actually, it's the delays and the impact of judicial reviews. Even those judicial reviews, even if they go through and the development can proceed, so they're not completely derailed by the judicial review, they're at least delayed. But more importantly now, because we know in the first 6 months of this year, 48% of all housing applications were subject to a judicial review. So actually 48% in the first 6 months of this year. What developers are now doing is they're not taking action for a period of 2 months, so they can wait and see, are they likely to be subject to a judicial review. So in one way it's a self-imposed delay, but it's also a very reasonable approach.
I think 2 months is absolutely reasonable, Carol. You know, I think they're absolutely right to do it as well. And to be honest with you, the government needs to actually follow through with their proposals with action to deal with this backlog already, because it's creating a noose around its own neck if it's not careful.
Yeah, but once we're accepting those levels of delays, then the SHD process isn't working as intended.
Well, yeah, that's right.
If it's going back into the local authorities, which of course it is, you know, there are improvements that can be made to streamline that, and we hope that all parties will be on board with that. But we still have the community element, where people need to have more of a say in the development, so that they're not derailing them for reasonably small or relatively small issues. In fact, the Telegraph in the UK yesterday just published an exploratory piece talking about NIMBYism and how to tackle it. And one of the proposals there is that people within a community, residents within a community, whether they're renting or they own their own home, will be given an opportunity to vote on new developments coming in. And when I first read it, I was thinking, well, that's terrible, they're all going to vote no. But actually, as I thought about it, this could be really strong and really powerful, because what we've seen through the judicial reviews is that it's always the loud minority that are shouting. It's a handful of people derailing projects. The majority of people, even if they're comfortable in their own home, their family aren't, their adult kids aren't, their grandkids aren't, and there's no prospect for them to be. So, you know, have we done the community or the public a disservice by not trusting them with more information so that they can get on board with these types of developments? So, you know, for example, build to rent, you've talked there about the importance of community. It's one of the key amenities. Everything through build to rent is being done to foster this sense of community. But it's not just within the tenants moving into that building. It's because they're moving in as long-term tenants. So, you know, we'll see the leases longer. They will have more of a role in the local community. Correct.
Absolutely.
Is that being done well in other places?
Absolutely. Yeah. My hometown of Manchester, that you should see it. Honestly, I remember growing up there, and there was, in the city centre, was no sense of community. Really? Now it's seriously, it was a go to work, come out. Now it's people are living in there, and it does really have that sense of vibrancy and community in there. And other places, Leeds, London, they've all got that. You know, London's got villages now inside the city centre. It might sound stupid, but it does. There's local communities in there, and they're very defined. And I think that's what people like more than anything else, is that sense of community and belonging.
Do you think the longer term leases will help promote this? So, for example, people who are living in their own communities, whether it's in towns, villages, cities, if they see a build to rent development coming in, but they know the leases are longer than 2 years, possibly 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, do you think that will change the perception, and they will see that actually these are people who are going to come in, start families, have their children attend the local schools, they're going to frequent the local businesses?
I agree, Carol, absolutely. It's all about stability on both sides, actually. It's stability for the tenant, for the community, and for the investor as well, isn't it? So it works well all ways around, I think. And you're absolutely right, that sense of community, if you're living in it and part of it, with that long-term commitment, is absolutely the way forward.
Vince, at the start of the interview, we mentioned there that you're going to be hosting a seminar for the SCSI tomorrow morning, Wednesday at 11 a.m. Do you know, are you going to be speaking to an industry audience?
It's a mixture, actually, Carol. I do know that. There are all the usual players in there. There's people from Greystar, Hines, Hope McDonald, the PRS agent, as I call them, and many other there. But there's a lot of people that are just signed up out of interest to know a little bit more about BTR.
Okay, and obviously that's a positive thing, because yes, we want to educate the industry, but actually there needs to be a wider education. I don't suppose there's any journalists signed up for that. We could do with that.
I don't know. I'm sure Paul McNeve will be there somewhere.
He straddles both sides. No, but look,
yeah.
In all seriousness, this is a really important thing, that we need to get the messaging right. But also we need to get the delivery right. But the reality is the community can't be left behind, because they're the people who have derailed it in the past. And I don't say that in a blaming way. I say it, actually, I think, like all communications, the duty was on the developer to communicate how their development and the people who are going to live in it was going to enhance the community. And if they failed to do that, that was leading to judicial review. So I don't, when I talk about the community like that, I'm certainly not blaming them. I think there's an education process that needs to happen, and a lot of that has to come from the developer. However, it can't, we can't have this them or us polarizing all the different solution providers in the marketplace, which is happening at the moment. One of the positive things about Housing for All, I hope, is that it shows that we need all the solution providers. And there's a place for each of them. We don't need to be pitted one against the other.
Yes, I agree absolutely, Carol. I mean, one of the things that I find a bit disturbing is that people think BTR is the old concrete jungle, and it's not. It's certainly not. It's part of the solution. I don't think it's the solution. It's part of the solution to improve housing for everybody and to create that sense of community, I think.
Yeah. Look, it will be interesting to see. Obviously, we want to get build to rent growing in Ireland, but on the right track in a way that it genuinely is a solution provider, and it's integrating community as well, because it's something that we failed at in the past across all placemaking, whether it's public or private housing. But the only thing is there's an opportunity now to get this right, but it will require people rowing together, and that includes public, private, rental and ownership. What's the main takeaway that you want people on the seminar tomorrow to leave with?
I want them to leave with the fact that this is a mainstream asset class, and that what it is part of the overall solution for the housing crisis that we're under, and to understand that far from being an antagonistic approach, is to create a sense of community that used to reside inside urban centres, and to recreate that.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you so much for joining us. That was Vince Harney, CEO of Anisorian. We'll be back after a quick break.
93.9 Dublin South FM.
Hello and welcome to Property Matters here on Dublin South FM. You can contact the show on Twitter, Facebook or on LinkedIn at iPropertyRadio, or indeed email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. Your host for today is Brian Fox and myself, Carol Tallon. And Brian, you're very welcome. As people will be able to see, you are actually in the studio, whereas I am still hiding out. So how have things been? It's been a long time since we've had your presence on the show.
Well, it's been a long time. Yeah, I mean, obviously with the pandemic, it's been a fairly strange sort of time for everybody, and including the business that we're talking about, property as well. So it'll be good to get back into studio again and get to be able to discuss whatever is coming up in news in relation to property and politically and community wise as well. So
absolutely,
it has been very strange from that point of view,
Yeah, and actually even seeing you is strange, because obviously we've been talking on the phone, but I haven't been into the studio in 15, 16 months. I know you're back in the studio there, and we're talking about when to bring the show back in and guests. Again, we know from the local businesses and property managers, people are officially making their way back into the office this month, but everybody I've spoken to, they're doing it in a very tentative way. So actually, a lot of the teams that I'm speaking with, they're only going back one day a week, or they're not going back regularly until January. So this mass return to the office, I'm not sure if it's happening the way people are talking about it. You're actually venturing in and out to the studio in Dundrum Town Centre. what's activity like on the roads?
Oh, very busy, very busy, very, very busy indeed. But we've had problems here trying to make programs as well and trying to keep programs going as well, because, well, from my point of view, we like to have people in studio as opposed to on phones. But it's an interesting era. I mean, getting away from, well, talking about technology, the advances that various other broadcasters are trying to make in terms of technology as well, to try and improve sound and vision as well.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And look, the technology supporting this has improved. But one of the things that I've really loved was actually being able to access people from anywhere in the world as opposed to needing them to be in studio. So I wonder, will there be some manner of hybrid iProperty radio? I think there might have to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Well, consider too that, the property business has gone through some well, shall we call them changes, because way back in January, there was no viewing allowed.
Yeah. Oh, and actually, the new technologies that estate agents have been embracing, we're going to really focus on those now over the coming months, because actually, iProperty Radio, we're almost 3 years on air now. If you can believe it, it'll be 3 years this Christmas. And over that time, we featured prop tech and technology heavily. Yeah. And there was definitely a case of, maybe having to give a little push, to get the industry on board. Definitely the industry was a little slower than we might have liked, whereas all that has changed.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and as well as that, property has become, domestic residential property has become a political hot potato now because of the problems that we experienced during the shutdown as well. And now you've got Fianna Fáil coming out with a Housing for All document, which, some people are pleased with, others aren't. Some people say it's Fianna Fáil trying to throw money at it, at the whole property business, in order for them to be seen to be active for the general election. And then you've got Sinn Féin, as you know, with Ona Bryn writing numbers of books on property as well. So we're going into some exciting times in terms of property as well now, in the programme as well, going forward,
Brian, I've missed your political savvy on the show, because I'm not sure if people are aware, but you actually have the Friday Forum show there on Dublin South FM, and politics is your main topic that you cover. And of course, housing is so political at the moment, and not just with the Housing for All. I mean, before the summer recess, we were speaking to Senator John Cummins, and he was talking to us about 7 bills that were passed quite quickly in the lead up to the recess. And I think about 5 of those related to housing. There's so much reform underway that you'd almost wonder what's the priority and where to start. But one of the big ones that is going to make a big difference, and we have touched on it on the show here before, SHDs, the strategic housing developments.
Absolutely, yeah. Strategic housing developments, yeah.
Well, that's going
to be an interesting one as well, because as you're well aware, and I'm sure listeners are aware as well, the power of development, if you want to put it like that way, has been taken out of the hands of councillors and in the hands of On Board Planol. And there's a lot of there are many problems with that in terms of how councillors and local authorities are reacting to that. And as we know too, they're going to go. Many of the projects under discussion are going for judicial review as well.
Yeah, and that's been a huge problem.
A huge problem. Problem. So that'll be an ongoing story as well as we proceed as well. So there's a lot going on, Carol.
There is, and
alone, particularly speaking alone.
Yeah, well, no, there's a lot of change. Unfortunately, I think there's probably too much political influence in housing at the moment. However, I am hopeful that when the new Housing Commission launches, that will be chaired by John O'Connor, who was just retired from the Housing Agency. I'm genuinely positive that I'm optimistic about it, because I think that it can be a non-political voice amongst the chaos at the moment.
Yeah, as will. It'll be interesting to see too how what the reaction is like to the new Land Development Agency as well, because they're only kicking off at the moment as well, and they've got a new CEO as well.
Yeah, and look, the new CEO, but more importantly, has massive resources and big ambition. These are big targets. I don't think we've ever had an agency so well resourced and so ambitiously tasked. To be honest, I think the big challenge will be how long will the agency have to prove itself before it becomes a political target.
I'd imagine to be under a lot of pressure to achieve goals, and its budget now has been dramatically improved as well. So it'll be under major pressure to develop the lands they're given, and so it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how they will relate to the local authorities as well, because I think it was one of the ministers there during the various think-ins, isn't it, have told local authorities to step up in terms of development as well, housing development as well. So it will be very interesting.
Yeah, yes, they will need to step up, but they're going to need to be a little more flexible and think more in terms of diverse housing solutions.
Yeah,
it can't be this pitting the public sector against the private sector. We know now that doesn't work. And all it does is create a stalemate. So the community is going to be given, the local community, the public are going to be given a greater voice, both themselves and through their local councillors. We want to make sure that that's used wisely.
Yeah. And we, of course, will have to keep an eye too on Dublin City Council in terms of so many of their housing projects being blocked as well over the past number of months. And
these are just some of the things we're going to be touching on when we kick off the new season. So, Brian, from my point of view, welcome back, because I'm so delighted to have you back. We've missed that political voice.
Good to be back. Not at all. No, it's good to be back as well, Carol, with you.
Very good. Well, sure, look, as discussed, we have a busy season ahead. And after the break now, we're going to get stuck into some of the issues plaguing built rent in Ireland with Vince Harney of Anisorian. So for now, we need to take a quick break. Stay tuned.
93.9 Dublin South FM.
Welcome back to Property Matters on Dublin South FM with myself, Carol Tallon, and Brian Fox. You can contact us on Twitter at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. So, as regular listeners of the show here over the last number of years will be familiar, normally at this stage in the show, we talk about PropTech activity. And after our break for the summer, it's been interesting and heartening to see what kind of activity there's been in PropTech, and indeed looking back over the last 15 months and 18 months of the pandemic. So firstly, looking back over the last 18 months, PropTech globally, it has been an absolutely buoyant 18 months. That's globally, not just in Ireland and the UK. There's been a massive reported increase in M&A activity, which is interesting. There's been a consolidation, which means we have lost some of our providers that didn't survive. But again, usually what happens in the startup scene is when these companies don't survive, not all the innovation is lost. It generally transitions or pivots into a new offering, one that perhaps has a better market fit. There's also been a massive hike in angel and VC funding, and a few Irish success stories coming to the fore, which has been great to see. Now, globally, it has been reported, and again, it's the experience of Irish agents that we've spoken to as well. There's been a massive increase in PropTech adoption. So we know that over the course of the pandemic and the restrictions that were in place, there's been a much greater consumer reliance on technology to find, access, value, finance, purchase, convey, and even furnish their new homes and investment properties. And that's fantastic, because this is what we've been working towards and trying to encourage for the last 5 or 6 years. In relation to how agents are faring, the estate agents we've spoken to around the country, we've seen that most agencies now are offering VR tours, whereas before that might have only been for special properties or high value properties. Now almost all properties are coming with a virtual tour. We are seeing, again, property videos on social media. They've become much more prevalent, that almost every property now has a video attached to it. But more importantly, from the estate agency side, the people we've spoken to, it's been interesting to see, I'm going to say a greater reliance on existing CRM, but I would say it's more a case of actually an acknowledgement of the capacity that the CRM systems have, but maybe weren't being fully utilised up till now. So that's been one interesting transition. Another one we're seeing is that there's a slew of new estate agency websites, and these are directly responding to how consumers have changed how they interact with agents over the past 18 months. And with these new websites, we're seeing a couple of key trends emerging. But critically, the most important one is that we don't have the same reliance on the look or aesthetic of the website. And there seems to be a much better understanding that actually all of the power is in the search engine optimization, the SEO, and this is being enhanced. More importantly, it's being resourced. So for any estate agency around the country that's looking for ways to make improvements and tangible improvements, particularly with the shortage of secondhand sellers coming into the market at the moment, I would suggest the single most powerful thing you can do is actually an SEO audit of your website and really pay attention to the stats that are in the property portal websites, so you can compare yourself with your peers in the industry and in your local area, find out what they're doing well, and really see, because what we've seen is that the standard has changed over the last 18 months. So even if you were top of your game 18 months ago, you're unlikely to be top of your game now if your agency didn't respond. And that's not necessarily through technology. That might be through other forms of innovation or changing your service offering. But if you didn't change over the last 18 months, then you will more than likely have found your position within your local, the local estate agency there will have changed. So really what I want to do today as we kick off our newest season in Property Matters, it's a call out to not just estate agents, but also to innovators of tech-driven solutions for the planning, construction, or property management sectors, whether it's around smart building technology and IoT solutions, or whether it's tech improving the ESG or the environmental, social, and governance performance of a building or a portfolio. We want to make sure that we showcase the very best of that, while we will continue to showcase and bring you the most innovative global construction, real estate, and smart city solutions. Through PropTech Ireland, we are on a mission to promote homegrown innovation. The reality is we have some really smart people doing some really smart things. So I'm urging the industry, as I did in our first episode almost 3 years ago, to be open to innovation, to support startups who need access to market information and testing environments. The knock-on benefits are huge. So if anybody's interested in that, I really do encourage you to talk to the team at PropTech Ireland and to be open to innovation when it's pitched to you. So that's it from us this week. Thank you for listening in to Property Matters on Dublin South FM. You can get in touch with the show on social media at iPropertyRadio or by emailing hello@iPropertyRadio.com. Also, my thanks to Peter Rice on sound. We're back at the same time next week. From Brian Fox and myself, Carol Tallon. Stay safe.